December 1882. A Massachusetts greeting card company prints 50,000 cards for Valentine's Day. The image is simple: a plump infant with feathered wings holding a golden bow. Beneath it, a single word: angel. The printer has no idea he is committing forgery. 1600 years earlier, a scribe in a stone chamber translates Isaiah from Hebrew to Greek. 6 wings, flames, a voice that cracks the temple foundation. The scribe's hand shakes as he writes the word: seraphim, burning ones. There is no bow. There are no hearts. There is only terror, and the command that opens every encounter: do not be afraid. The distance between these two images marks a total inversion of meaning. The modern guardian angel, soft, protective, draped in white, appears nowhere in the Hebrew Bible. The malach, the divine messenger, operates as a function. When it appears to Balaam, he cannot see it. His donkey can. The animal collapses in the road, crushed by the presence of something standing in the path, sword drawn, silent. When the priest Ezekiel describes what he sees by the Chebar River, he avoids the word beautiful. He describes geometry instead: wheels within wheels, covered in eyes. 4 faces on a single being: man, lion, ox, eagle. Wings that sound like rushing water when they move. The medieval mystics who study these texts die. Some go mad. What remains hidden is the process that transformed executioners, guards, and living architecture into symbols of protection. The cherubim, mythic sentries wielding flaming swords, became confused with infant cupids. The seraphim, serpentine and burning, saw themselves painted with bird-like wings and placed on hospital walls. The evidence survives in the translations, the art, and the systematic recategorization of the terrifying as the comforting. The record was overwritten. Finding the original requires stripping away centuries of visual paint to discover who changed the image and why. The Greeks lacked a word for what the Hebrews described. In the 3rd century BCE, 72 scholars gathered in Alexandria to translate the Torah into Greek. The project would become known as the Septuagint. When they reached the word malach, they paused. Malach serves as a verb made noun, meaning to dispatch or to send. The being itself defines itself entirely by its task. It functions as the sent one. No autonomy exists. No will goes beyond the sender's intent. The Greek translators chose angelos, a word that already existed in their language for a human messenger or courier. The term carried none of the theological weight of the Hebrew original. An angelos in Athens delivered letters. An angelos in Rome announced victories. It served as a job title, nothing more. This constitutes the first mistranslation, or perhaps the first translation that proved too accurate. The Hebrew Bible avoids providing an origin story for the malach. They arrive when needed, deliver the command, and vanish. In Genesis 18, 3 men visit Abraham. He offers them water, bread, and rest. They eat, they speak. At no point does the text identify them as angels. But by Genesis 19, these same figures are destroying Sodom, and suddenly they bear the name Malachim, the plural. The ambiguity remains deliberate. In Judges 13, a man appears to Manoah's wife and tells her she will bear a son. She describes him as having an appearance like the appearance of the angel of God. Later, when the figure ascends in the flame of the altar, Manoah realizes what has happened and believes they will die. The text refuses to resolve whether the visitor was human, angel, or something else. This defines the nature of the malach. It takes whatever form the message requires. The word appears 213 times in the Hebrew Bible. In most cases, the function stays clear: announce, command, execute. But there is a subset of appearances that complicates the category entirely: the Malach Yahweh, the angel of the Lord. In Exodus 3, Moses encounters a flame in a bush. The text says the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire. But 2 verses later, the voice from the bush says, "I am the God of your father." The angel becomes God, or God becomes the angel. The text avoids distinguishing between them. This happens repeatedly. The Malach Yahweh speaks in the first person as Yahweh, accepts worship, and makes covenants, all actions reserved for God alone. Early Jewish interpreters debated whether this represented a separate being or a visible manifestation of the invisible God. The question remains unresolved. By the 2nd century CE, this ambiguity had become dangerous. It implied that there were 2 powers in heaven, a claim later condemned as heresy. The Malach Yahweh was quietly redefined as a created intermediary, distinct from God, but acting with full authority. The Greeks gave it a name. The Hebrews gave it a function. Neither fully captured the reality. The Hebrew Bible uses different terms for different functions. The Malachim represent the sent ones, messengers, executors, and extensions of divine will. But a second category exists, referenced far less frequently, but staying theologically distinct: the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. These operate as members of the divine council. In Job 1, the sons of God present themselves before the Lord. Among them appears Satan, avoiding the fallen rebel persona of later tradition to remain a member of the court, described as the accuser. His role focuses on testing, challenging, and questioning. He belongs to the council's function. Psalm 82 describes this council in session. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. The term Elohim here, usually translated as God, is plural. The text describes a henotheistic assembly presided over by Yahweh, where lesser divine beings face judgment for failing their assigned roles. This describes henotheism, one God supreme, but other divine beings acknowledged as real. The distinction between the Malachim and the B'nai Elohim remains functional, not ontological. A Malach lacks autonomy. It is dispatched, it performs, it returns. A member of the B'nai Elohim keeps a role within the divine government, an office, a jurisdiction. This becomes critical in Genesis 6, where the sons of God see the daughters of men and take them as wives. The text avoids calling them Malachim. They are B'nai Elohim, members of the council who have abandoned their posts. By the time of the Septuagint translation, this distinction had become uncomfortable. The Greek translators replaced B'nai Elohim in Genesis 6 with angels, collapsing the 2 categories into one. The theological problem flattened into a translation choice, but the original Hebrew preserves the difference. The Malachim are tools. The B'nai Elohim are officers. And that difference transforms Genesis 6 into a rebellion rather than an errand gone wrong. The number 7 appears suddenly in Jewish angelology after the Babylonian exile. Before 586 BCE, the Hebrew Bible avoids naming individual beings. After the exile, something changes. The exiled Jews spent 70 years in Babylon under Persian rule. The Persians practiced Zoroastrianism, a faith centered on Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light, locked in cosmic struggle against Angra Mainyu, the spirit of darkness. Ahura Mazda worked through 7 immortal beings called the Amesha Spentas. the holy immortals. Each governed a specific aspect of creation. Vohumana, the good mind. Asha Vahishta, representing truth and righteousness. Kshathra Vairya, the desirable dominion. Spenta Armaiti, holy devotion. Haurvatat, wholeness. Ameritat, immortality. And Ahura Mazda himself, completing the seven. These functioned as attributes of the divine made manifest, semi-independent emanations with defined roles in maintaining cosmic order rather than mere messengers. The structure remains familiar. The Hebrew Benai Elohim served as council members with jurisdictions. The Sumerian Anunnaki functioned as administrators of fate, but the Amesha Spentas introduced personalization. Each possessed a name, each claimed a domain, each could be invoked individually. By the time the Book of Tobit was written, Jewish texts begin naming angels for the first time. Raphael the healer, Michael the warrior. By the time of First Enoch, there are lists including Uriel, Gabriel, Sariel, and Remiel. The template remains Zoroastrian. The borrowing stays selective. The Jewish concept of a singular God remained distinct from Zoroastrian dualism. The angels remained created beings, subordinate servants, avoiding the status of co-eternal attributes. But the organizational logic shifted. The vague Malachim and the unnamed Benei Elohim began to crystallize into named officers with portfolios. The archangels, a term borrowed directly from the Greek archangelos, meaning chief messenger, emerge as a distinct class. By the time of Pseudo-Dionysius in the 5th century CE, this structure would face formalization into the 9 choirs. But the foundation was laid here, in the contact between Jewish monotheism and Persian cosmic hierarchy. The second Zoroastrian contribution appears more subtle. The Fravashi. A Fravashi represents a personal guardian spirit, a pre-existing spiritual component of your own soul, created at the same moment you were, rather than an external being assigned to protect you. In Zoroastrian theology, every human possesses one. The Fravashi fights for you, guides you, and intercedes on your behalf before Ahura Mazda. This stays functionally distinct from the Amesha Spentas. The 7 holy immortals govern cosmic principles. The Fravashi exist as individual, personal, and countless. This concept appears nowhere in the Hebrew Bible. The Malachim arrive dispatched when needed. They lack any permanent assignment to specific humans. Whether serving as an obstacle or delivering instructions, the biblical record lacks any precedent for a personal, lifelong guardian angel. But by the time of the intertestamental period, the centuries between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, the idea has taken root. The Book of Tobit assigns Raphael as Tobias's companion and protector. Jesus, in Matthew 18:10, references their angels watching over children. By the 4th century CE, Christian theologians debated whether every human possesses a guardian angel or only the baptized. The source remains Zoroastrian. The Fravashi theology addressed a structural necessity. A distant, incomprehensible God could feel inaccessible. A cosmic bureaucracy of Benei Elohim overseeing nations and dispensing judgment offered little connection for an individual believer. The Fravashi bridged this gap by making the divine personal. Your protector functioned as a being intimately connected to your existence, present from the moment of creation, fighting for your survival. When this concept migrated into Jewish and Christian thought, it softened the angels. The terrifying executioners of Sodom became personal guardians. The sword-wielding Malach blocking Balaam's road became a protective presence walking beside you. This transformation, from cosmic functionary to personal companion, constitutes the second great domestication of the angel. The first was visual, turning monsters into babies. This second remains theological, turning instruments of judgment into advocates. 593 BCE. The priest by the Chebar River sees the sky split open. Ezekiel's account in chapter 1 functions as forensic detail. He attempts to describe something for which Hebrew lacks vocabulary, and the result reads like a technical manual written by someone experiencing sensory overload. 4 beings, each with the fourfold face witnessed earlier: man, lion, ox, eagle, positioned at right angles so the creature moves without turning. The vision describes function, pure geometry. Beneath them, the wheels. The Ophanim move in parallel, synchronized but independent, rather than being attached to the creatures. Each wheel intersects another at a perpendicular angle, a wheel within a wheel, creating a gyroscopic structure that can move instantly in any direction without rotation. And the tall, awesome rims, full of eyes all around. The implication reaches for surveillance, omnidirectional awareness. Nothing can approach unobserved. The beings themselves bear the name Chayot, living creatures. The term differs from Malach, from B'nai Elohim, and from Seraphim or Cherubim. The Chayot represent a distinct category, mobile architecture for the throne of God. Ezekiel describes the sound they make when they move, like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. The sound suggests mechanical propulsion. Above them, a platform of crystal, described as terrible or fear-inducing. Above the platform stands a throne, and on the throne, a likeness with a human appearance. This refers to the throne chariot, the Merkava. The Chayot serve as its suspension system. The Ophanim operate as its wheels, and the entire apparatus exists to transport the glory of the Lord. The text says, Einahem, their eyes. But Hebrew stays ambiguous. The word can mean literal eyes. It can also mean something that resembles an eye, a spring, a gleam, or the facet of a gem. When Ezekiel writes that the rims were full of eyes all around, he may describe biological senses. He may describe inlaid jewels catching the light. Early interpreters split on this question. Rabbinic commentators in the Talmudic period favored the gem interpretation. The Ophanim, they argued, represented divine machinery, sacred but mechanical. The eyes appeared as beryl, topaz, or sapphire, stones reflecting the glory of God, multiplying the radiance. The creatures remained terrifying, but they served as objects rather than sapient beings. This interpretation provided theological advantages. If the Ophanim existed as merely apparatus, they posed no risk of independent will. They lacked the ability to act, choose, or fall. But the Christian Church Fathers read the text differently. Gregory of Nazianzus identified the eyes as marks of omniscience. The wheels could see in all directions simultaneously, past, present, and future, reflecting the all-seeing nature of God. The Ophanim served as watchers in the truest sense, divine surveillance mechanisms, ensuring that nothing in creation escaped notice. This interpretation aligned with the later development of angels as guardians, observers, and recorders. If the wheels possessed eyes, they possessed awareness. If they gained awareness, they could witness. And if they could witness, they could testify. The text refuses to resolve the question. Ezekiel, standing by the river, avoids writing theology. He writes what he saw, in the only language available to him. Whether the rims gleamed with sapphires or stared with 10,000 unblinking eyes, the effect remained identical. The priest fell on his face, unable to endure the sight. Ezekiel's vision became a text. The text became a tradition. the tradition became dangerous. By the 2nd century CE, a body of mystical practice developed around the Merkava, the chariot. Practitioners sought to replicate Ezekiel's experience, to ascend through the heavenly realms, past the angelic guards, and stand before the throne. This remained outside mainstream Judaism. This was Ma'aseh Merkava, the work of the chariot, and it stayed restricted, guarded, and forbidden to most. The Hekkalot texts, literally palaces, describe the architecture of heaven as a series of 7 ascending chambers. Each stands guarded by angels demanding passwords, seals, and proof of authorization. The practitioner must navigate these checkpoints, invoking specific names and reciting precise formulas. Failure results in annihilation. The most famous warning comes from the Talmud. 4 entered the Pardes. Ben Azai looked and died. Ben Zoma looked and went mad. Elisha, Ben Abuya, looked and cut the plants, becoming a heretic. Only Rabbi Akiva ascended in peace and descended in peace. The vision offered a test rather than a gift, and most failed. The guards of the Hekkalot appear in vivid, hostile detail. They avoid any pastoral role. They operate as checkpoint enforcers, armed, suspicious, and empowered to destroy anyone lacking the proper credentials. The Ophanim appear in these texts as part of the throne's defense system, rotating, watching, ensuring that no unauthorized soul approaches the glory. This represents the opposite of the later guardian angel theology. These are not beings assigned to protect you. These are beings assigned to keep you out. The Merkava tradition faced eventual suppression, deemed too dangerous for public teaching. But the image it preserved, of heaven as a fortified realm, with angels as hostile guards, and a divine presence that kills the unprepared, survived. The wheels avoided softening. The eyes refused to close. The terror Ezekiel felt by the river became a permanent feature of the vision. Do not approach unless summoned. 740 BCE, the year King Uzziah died. Isaiah is in the temple when the vision strikes. He sees the Lord seated on a throne, high and lifted up. The train of the robe fills the sanctuary, and standing above the throne, the seraphim, 6 wings each, face covered, feet covered, and flight enabled. The text describes only the wings and their use, rather than their bodies. They call to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The foundations of the temple shake. The doorposts tremble. Smoke fills the room. The vision differs from Ezekiel's Merkava. Ezekiel's vision was mobile and mechanical, a throne chariot with wheels and geometry. Isaiah describes a vision that stays stationary and liturgical. The seraphim function as attendants in the throne room, performing a specific task, proclaiming holiness. The repetition, holy, 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 becomes the trisagion, one of the oldest liturgical formulas in both Jewish and Christian tradition. But the text offers no explanation for why the seraphim repeat the word 3 times, why they call to one another rather than to God, or why their voices shake the building. Isaiah reacts with dread. "Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." One of the seraphim flies to him, holding a burning coal taken from the altar with tongs. The being touches the coal to Isaiah's mouth. "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." This represents purification by fire. The seraphim burn away impurity. They avoid comforting, choosing instead to sterilize. The word seraphim serves as the plural of saraph. The root means to burn, but saraph carries meanings beyond fire. In Numbers 21, the Israelites face punishment with seraphim nahashim, fiery serpents. The serpents bite, the victims burn with fever, and many die. Moses receives instructions to craft a bronze serpent and mount it on a pole. Anyone bitten who looks at it survives. Here, saraph describes a venomous snake whose bite produces a burning sensation. The connection between serpents and the seraphim remains literal. In the ancient Near East, serpents survived as symbols of both danger and divinity. The Egyptian uraeus, the rearing cobra, appeared on the pharaoh's crown as a protective emblem. The goddess Wadjet took the form of a cobra. Serpents guarded temples, thrones, and sacred objects. Isaiah avoids describing the seraphim with human bodies. They possess 6 wings and voices, but the text omits any mention of arms, legs, or faces. What if Isaiah saw serpents? I mean literal serpents, not symbolic ones. Seraphim, burning, winged cobras, hovering above the throne, their voices shaking the foundations, their touch purifying through fire. Later tradition transforms them into something beautiful. Byzantine mosaics depict them as humanoid figures with bird wings, glowing with light. Renaissance paintings show them as youthful, serene, and worshipful. But the original Hebrew preserves the ambiguity. Saraph, to burn. Saraph, venomous snake. The seraphim exist as flame creatures and serpent creatures, terror made holy. The visual parallel stays exact. Isaiah describes 6-winged beings who hover above a throne associated with fire, proclaiming the holiness of the one seated. Egyptian iconography shows the winged cobra hovering above the pharaoh's throne in an identical posture, associated with fire and protecting the divine king. The Hebrews avoided worshipping in Egypt for 400 years without absorbing imagery. The Exodus narrative places Israelite slaves in proximity to temples, palaces, and ritual objects. Moses, raised in Pharaoh's household, would have seen the uraeus daily. When Isaiah encounters the seraphim, he uses a Hebrew word that means both burning and serpent. He describes beings with wings, fire, and voices that shake the sanctuary. The imagery functions as Egyptian, recontextualized. But the function has changed. The Egyptian uraeus protects the king by destroying enemies. The Hebrew seraphim purify the prophet by burning away sin. The uraeus spits venom. The seraphim carry burning coals. The imagery undergoes theological inversion. The image of the winged serpent of fire remains, but its purpose shifts from vengeance to sanctification. By the time Christian theology systematized the angelic orders, the serpent connection faced entire erasure. The seraphim became the highest choir, closest to God, embodiments of love and worship. But Isaiah, standing in the temple with smoke filling his lungs and a coal burning his mouth, saw cobras. The cherubim and the shiot represent the same beings. In Ezekiel's first vision, he calls them chayot, living creatures. In chapter 10, when he sees the vision again, he identifies them explicitly. These were the living creatures that I saw beneath the God of Israel by the Chebar Canal, and I knew that they were cherubim. The creatures remained unchanged. The terminology shifted. The 4 faces witnessed by the Chebar represent the magnitude of creation compressed into a mobile fortress. The cherubim function as guards. Their first appearance in the biblical narrative occurs in Genesis 3:24, stationed east of Eden with a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. They avoid delivering messages or assisting. They bar access. This function continues throughout Scripture. The Lamassu, Assyrian protective spirits, appear as winged bulls with human faces, stationed at palace gates and temple entrances. Their role: prevent unauthorized entry. The visual parallel to Ezekiel's cherubim stays exact: hybrid beings with multiple symbolic attributes, positioned as sentries. The Hebrews avoided inventing the cherubim. They inherited the template and redirected it toward Yahweh. The four faces correspond to the four fixed signs of the zodiac. Lion equals Leo. Ox, the bull, equals Taurus. Man, the water-bearer, equals Aquarius. Eagle equals Scorpio, the ancient symbol before the scorpion. These represent the cardinal points, the four pillars of the zodiacal year. In Babylonian astrology, they marked the solstices and equinoxes, the structural anchors of the calendar. This alignment seems unlikely to be accidental. The vision occurs during the Babylonian exile. Ezekiel finds himself surrounded by a culture that reads the cosmos through astrology. The heavens appear mapped, categorized, and governed by beings assigned to zones and seasons. Some scholars argue that the cherubim's four faces represent a deliberate appropriation. Yahweh's throne guards bear the symbols of cosmic order, demonstrating sovereignty over the very structures Babylon worships. Others argue the connection remains purely functional. The four faces allow the creatures to move in any direction without turning. The zodiac stays irrelevant in this view. The text avoids resolving the question, but the imagery persists. In Christian iconography, the four faces of the cherubim serve as symbols of the four gospel writers. Man represents Matthew, the genealogy of Christ's humanity. Lion represents Mark, the voice in the wilderness. Ox represents Luke, sacrificial emphasis. Eagle represents John, soaring theological vision. The cherubim's faces, once guarding Eden, turn into literary emblems. The terror softens into symbolism. The Ark of the Covenant functions as a throne platform. Exodus 25 gives the construction specifications. On the lid, the caperet, the mercy seat, two cherubim are hammered from a single piece of gold. They face each other, wings spread upward, meeting over the center. And God declares, "There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you." The space between the wings serves as the throne. This follows the same structure as the Egyptian Sphinx throne. Pharaohs appeared seated between two leonine guardians, hybrid creatures with human heads and lion bodies positioned as armrests, flanking the seat. The beings avoided serving. They guarded. Their presence declared the throne defended. The ark's cherubim replicate this iconography exactly. Two hybrid beings, wings forming the canopy, with the space between them reserved for deity. The cherubim avoid worship. They frame the presence and enforce the boundary. When the Philistines capture the ark in 1 Samuel 5, they find the statue of their god Dagon fallen on its face before it. The next morning, Dagon appears again, this time with his head and hands severed. Plagues break out. The Philistines return the ark. The message stays clear. The cherubim avoid protecting Israel. They protect the throne space of Yahweh. Anyone unauthorized who approaches, even another god, faces destruction. Genesis 6 gives 4 verses. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The text provides no details, no names, no motives. no consequences beyond the flood. The Book of 1st Enoch, composed between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE, takes this fragment and builds an entire mythology. 200 Benai Elohim descend to Mount Hermon. They avoid impulsive action. They plan. They swear an oath to one another, binding themselves to the act so that no individual can withdraw and leave the others exposed to punishment. The leader, Shemyaza, gathers the chiefs, 19 others face naming, and proposes the plan. Let us choose wives from among the children of men and beget us children. The others hesitate. Shemyaza responds, I fear you will not agree to this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. So they swear. They bind themselves by mutual curses on Mount Hermon. The name means devoted to destruction or oath. The location serves as a theological marker. This represents where the boundary was crossed. The Watchers serve as members of the Benai Elohim. They represent officers with jurisdiction and autonomy who abandon their posts. The crime remains desertion rather than lust. The flood serves as the necessary resolution to this hybrid contamination. The 200 Watchers descend for different reasons. Shemyaza's stated motive focuses on procreation. Let us choose wives and beget children. His crime revolves around the act of union itself, the crossing of the ontological boundary between divine and human. Azazel's motive differs. He avoids coming for women, seeking instead to teach. 1 Enoch specifies the curriculum of this invasion. These lessons focused on weaponry and vanity, tools of violence and tools of seduction. The other Watchers contribute as well: astrology, divination, and the interpretation of signs. But Azazel stands as the primary offender. In some texts, he bears the name of the true leader, rather than Shemyaza. The distinction matters theologically. If the crime remains lust, the Watchers can be understood as succumbing to temptation, a weakness or a failure of discipline. The punishment fits the crime. They face binding and imprisonment. But if the crime involves teaching, transferring forbidden knowledge from the divine realm to the human, the problem becomes structural. The Watchers avoid failing. They choose. They weaponized humanity, granting mortals access to technologies intended to remain beyond their reach. This mirrors the Apkallu narrative, the Babylonian sages who brought civilization to humanity, but inverted. The Apkallu enjoyed celebration. The Watchers faced condemnation. Shemyaza repents. In some traditions, he hangs himself between heaven and earth, suspended in guilt. Azazel avoids repentance. He remains defiant, and his punishment stays unique, binding in Dudael, a place of jagged rocks, awaiting the final judgment. The leadership tension never resolves. 1st Enoch presents both as leaders. Later, tradition splits them: Shemyaza as the lustful chief and Azazel as the rebellious teacher. 1 Enoch provides a detailed curriculum. Azazel taught metallurgy, how to extract ore, smelt it, and forge it into weapons, swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, the technology of organized violence. He also taught cosmetics, antimony for the eyes, pigments for the face, and techniques for beautifying the eyelids. These lessons focused on the art of seduction formalized, transforming appearance into a weapon. The other Watchers taught their own specialties. Shemyaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, herbalism as sorcery. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments, counterspells, and apotropaic magic. Barakel taught astrology, reading the stars for omens. Kokabel taught the constellations, mapping the heavens for navigation and divination. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of clouds, weather prediction or manipulation. Arachiel taught the signs of the earth, geomancy, interpreting tremors and cracks. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun, solar divination. Sariel taught the course of the moon, lunar calendars, and tidal calculation. These teachings constitute infrastructure, the technological and symbolic foundations of civilization. The theology stays explicit. These arts were meant to remain hidden. Humanity lacked the divine permission for metallurgy, because metallurgy enables warfare at scale. Humanity lacked permission for astrology, because reading the heavens implies access to divine foreknowledge. Humanity lacked permission for cosmetics, because altering appearance implies the power to deceive. The Watchers transferred knowledge from the divine realm to the mortal, collapsing a boundary intended to be permanent. The structure remains identical. Non-human beings teaching humanity skills that elevate them beyond their natural state. This constitutes the inversion of the Apkallu established earlier. The difference lies in the verdict. Enoch 1 frames the flood as a response to the spread of forbidden knowledge, as much as to the Nephilim. The corruption functions as epistemological. Humanity knew too much. The reset was total. The Nephilim exceeded normal proportions. They remained unsustainable. First Enoch describes them as consuming all the produce of humanity. When that ran out, they turned on humans. When humans ran out, they turned on each other. The text uses the word devour, a literal predation. They lived as giants in an ecosystem lacking the resources to support them. Their hunger was structural, a consequence of their hybrid nature. They needed more fuel than the earth could provide. The violence escalated. The Nephilim began to war against one another. Brother killed brother. The earth, the text says, cried out because of the bloodshed. The ancient Near Eastern worldview holds that blood spilled on soil pollutes it, making it barren. The land itself becomes cursed. The corruption spread. Humans, observing the Nephilim, learned violence from them. The weapons Azazel taught them to forge moved from the hands of giants to the hands of humanity against itself. This constitutes the gigantomachy, the war of the giants. Greek mythology has its own version in the Battle of the Titans. The motif appears across cultures. A generation of hybrid beings, half divine, who must be removed before the cosmos can stabilize. The flood operated as divine surgery, a cosmic removal of a contamination that could not be contained by any other means. The Nephilim drowned. Their bodies perished in the flood, but their spirits did not. First, Enoch introduces a critical distinction. The Watchers remain indestructible. They can be bound, imprisoned, or judged, but they persist. The Nephilim, however, exist as hybrids, half divine, half human. When their human bodies die, their divine component, the spirit, survives. But it has no body to return to. It becomes disembodied, wandering, seeking. These are the demons. This theology solves a structural problem. If demons were fallen angels, every demon would be a member of the Benai Elohim who rebelled. That would imply a massive defection from the divine council, thousands, perhaps millions, of divine beings abandoning their posts. But with demons as the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the numbers make sense. 200 Watchers descend. They produce offspring, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of giants. Those giants die. Their spirits persist, and now the earth contains malevolent, bodiless entities seeking to influence, possess, or destroy humanity. The distinction became critical in later theology. Fallen angels, the Watchers, stay bound, imprisoned, awaiting final judgment. They avoid roaming the earth. They are not the demons Jesus casts out. Demons, Nephilim spirits, remain the active threat. They are the entities that tempt, possess, and corrupt. They represent what remains of the pre-flood contamination, still operating, still dangerous. This explains why exorcism works. Demons can be cast out because they remain fragments, spirits without bodies, parasites seeking hosts. Fallen angels cannot be exorcised. They possess too much power. Only God can judge them, and their judgment waits until the end. The flood transformed the problem. The giants are gone, but the spirits remain. The punishment is specific. 1 Enoch, chapter 10 records God's command to the archangel Raphael. Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Make an opening in the desert which is in Dudael, and cast him there. Place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness. Let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light. On the day of the great judgment, he shall be cast into the fire. Burial alive occurs in a specific location, under specific conditions, and for a specific duration. Dudael serves as a desert wasteland, possibly located near the Dead Sea. The name may derive from a Semitic root, meaning burning or cauldron. The geography represents a hostile environment, jagged, unworkable, a place where nothing grows. Azazel finds himself thrown into a pit and covered with sharp rocks, avoiding death, as a divine being remains indestructible, but instead facing total restraint. His face remains covered, consigned to total sensory deprivation in darkness and isolation. This punishment answers the act of teaching, for transferring knowledge, and for granting humanity weapons and tools intended to remain beyond their reach. The other watchers receive similar treatment. Shemyaza and his chiefs face binding in the valleys of the earth until the day of judgment. They remain imprisoned in darkness, unable to move or act. Their punishment consists of stasis, eternal suspension between creation and destruction. The archangels serve as the enforcers. Michael binds Shemyaza, Raphael binds Azazel, Gabriel destroys the Nephilim, Uriel warns Noah of the coming flood. The same beings introduced earlier as heralds and healers now act as jailers and executioners. Leviticus 16 prescribes a ritual for the Day of Atonement. 2 goats are selected, lots are cast. 1 goat is designated for the Lord and sacrificed as a sin offering. The other is designated for Azazel. The high priest lays his hands on the live goat and confesses over it all the sins of Israel. The goat then travels into the wilderness, carrying the sins into an uninhabited land. This is the scapegoat, La Azazel in Hebrew, meaning for Azazel. The text avoids explaining who or what Azazel is, presenting the name as if the audience already knows it. Early Jewish interpreters debated the meaning. Some argued Azazel represented a place, the wilderness itself. Others argued it represented a being, a demon, or a fallen entity residing in the desert. But first Enoch provides the context. Azazel is the watcher bound in Dudael. Leviticus 16 functions by sending the goat to a specific entity, imprisoned in a specific location. The theology stays deliberate. The sins are being returned to their source. As we saw in the syllabus of the Watchers, the contamination originated with the forbidden knowledge brought by Azazel and his chiefs. The scapegoat ritual functions as a reversal, sending the accumulation of human guilt back to the entity who first introduced the technologies of war and the arts of vanity. This constitutes theological contaminant disposal. The sins relocate from the community to the wilderness, shifting from humanity back to the entity who introduced them. The goat avoids returning. Some traditions describe the goat being pushed off a cliff in the wilderness, ensuring the sins never reappear. The animal functions as a one-way courier, carrying the pollution out of the camp and into Azazel's domain. This explains why the ritual occurs annually. The contamination persists. Every year, the community accumulates sin, and every year, the scapegoat carries it back. The cycle continues until the final judgment, when Azazel himself will face the fire and the contamination will face permanent destruction. Genesis 5:24 gives one line: Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. No death occurs, no burial appears, just disappearance. By the time of the Second Temple period, this single cryptic verse had generated an entire mythology. The book of 1st Enoch describes his journeys through the heavens, visions of the Watcher's punishment, and encounters with the throne of God. But 1st Enoch avoids describing what happened to Enoch's body. That account comes from 3rd Enoch, a much later mystical text from the 5th or 6th century. It functions as an account of transformation. 3. Enoch describes the process as body horror. God commands the archangel Michael to strip Enoch of his earthly garments and clothe him in garments of glory. The text describes this literally, specifying what happens to his flesh. My flesh turned to flame, my sinews to blazing fire, my bones to juniper coals, my eyelashes to lightning flashes, my eyeballs to fiery torches, the hairs of my head to hot flames, all my limbs to wings of burning fire, and the substance of my body to blazing fire. Physical conversion occurs. Carbon-based biology replaced with elemental fire. The man Enoch is disassembled and reconstructed as something else entirely. He bears a new name, Metatron. The etymology remains debated. Some trace it to the Greek metathronos, meaning one who serves behind the throne. Others argue it derives from the Latin metator, a guide or measurer. The name appears nowhere in the Hebrew Bible, emerging instead from the mystical traditions surrounding Merkava ascent. Metatron bears the title, the Lesser Yahweh, a description so controversial it was later condemned as heresy. He sits on a throne second only to God's. He bears the divine name. He wields authority to judge, to scribe, and to govern the heavenly realm. The transformation functions ontologically. Enoch, a human, becomes something functionally divine. This creates a theological crisis. If a human can become divine, the boundary between creator and creature collapses. The uniqueness of God suffers compromise. The hierarchy destabilizes. But the mystical tradition preserves the account. Enoch's transformation represents the ultimate reward for righteousness. He avoids staying human, reaching for transcendence instead. Yet the text emphasizes the horror of it, the burning, the disintegration, the replacement of flesh with fire, metamorphosis, violent and absolute. The text describes him sitting on a throne at the entrance to the seventh heaven, judging the souls of the dead and issuing decrees. When Rabbi Ishmael observes Metatron enthroned, he nearly offers worship, mistaking him for God. Metatron stops him. I am Enoch, son of Jared, the Holy One, blessed be he, appointed me to be a prince and a ruler among the ministering angels. This creates the two powers in heaven problem. The heretical sight of an enthroned mediator, punished via 60 fiery lashes in the Pardes accounts, remains the central monotheistic danger. Metatron faces demotion and humiliation to preserve the singularity of God, enforced with violent authority to prevent a human from being mistaken for the Creator. The Metatron tradition survived, preserved in the Hecalot texts, but with a persistent warning. Avoid mistaking the exalted mediator for the Creator. Avoid worshipping the transformed human. The body horror of Enoch's transformation remains theologically necessary. He must stay violently other, burning, inhuman, and monstrous, so that no one mistakes him for a better version of ourselves. He has ceased to be human, yet he remains something other than God. He exists in the gap, and that gap stays dangerous. The archangels emerge as distinct personalities in the post-exilic texts. Michael appears first in the book of Daniel as one of the chief princes who fights on behalf of Israel. He commands the heavenly armies against the dragon in Revelation, enforcing divine decree against other celestial beings. Gabriel appears in Daniel as the interpreter of visions. When Daniel sees the ram and the goat, he explains the symbolism. When Daniel prays, he arrives in swift flight to deliver the prophecy of the 70 weeks. He brings messages from God to humans, explaining mysteries and announcing the births of John the Baptist and Jesus. Raphael, the healer from the book of Tobit we encountered earlier, accompanies Tobias on a journey, protects him from a demon, and teaches him how to cure blindness. He reveals his identity at the end as one of the 7 who stand before the Lord. His restoration involves direct intervention, exorcism, and chemical knowledge. Uriel appears primarily in 1st Enoch and 2nd Esdras as the angel of judgment and cosmic knowledge. He shows Enoch the prison where the fallen watchers are bound and answers Ezra's questions about suffering and the end times. He operates as the jailer, the one who knows where the condemned are kept and why. These 4 function as specialists. Michael fights. Gabriel announces. Raphael heals. Uriel judges. The differentiation mirrors the Zoroastrian Amesha Spentaz, distinct divine attributes given personality and jurisdiction. But in Jewish angelology, these serve as created beings and subordinate servants, rather than emanations of God. Uriel has a canonical problem. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael appear in texts accepted by most of Christianity. Michael and Gabriel appear in canonical books like Daniel and Luke. Raphael appears in Tobit, which remains canonical for Catholic and Orthodox traditions, though apocryphal for Protestants. Uriel appears only in texts rejected by Western Christian traditions, such as 1st Enoch and 2nd Esdras. As a result, he stays structurally forgotten in Western liturgy and theology. The same angel, jailer of the watchers and revealer of cosmic secrets, remains present in one tradition and erased in another. A political decision regarding which texts are authoritative determined this outcome. Uriel's status reflects canon formation, rather than a theological argument about his existence. Yet in esoteric and mystical traditions, Uriel persists. The 4th archangel, the one who was left out. Samael represents the personality of divine severity, the licensed prosecutor of the heavenly court. But the Hebrew Bible also describes a raw, impersonal force known simply as the destroyer. The name appears in Talmudic and mystical literature, often translated as venom of God or poison of God. He operates as a functionary. His function revolves around poison, accusation, temptation, and death. Samael's transition from the accidental prosecutor of Job to the named venom of God represents a consolidation of roles. He serves as the prosecuting attorney in the heavenly court, searching for human failures, bringing charges, and demanding justice. The seducer. Later Jewish tradition places Samael as the serpent in Eden. He appears as a divine being who takes serpent form to tempt Eve. The Zohar describes him riding the serpent, using it as a vehicle. His motive reaches for testing. Again, can humanity obey a single prohibition? The answer comes back negative. Samael exposes the weakness already present, the executioner. Samael also appears as the angel of death in certain texts. He carries a sword dripping with poison. When a person's time arrives, Samael appears, and the soul departs through a violent extraction. The ambiguity runs intentional. Evil? The texts avoid simple answers. He acts within divine authorization. He accuses with God's permission. He tempts under God's watch. He executes at God's command. Yet his nature remains venom. Licensed, he stays dangerous. Authorized, he remains adversarial. He stands against humanity while serving divine justice, which makes him more terrifying than any rebel. Rebels can be resisted with divine help. Samael represents divine help aimed at you. Exodus 12 describes the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. God tells Moses, "About midnight, I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die." But verse 23 specifies the mechanism. The Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you. The destroyer, Mashit in Hebrew, remains distinct from Yahweh. God refuses to allow the destroyer to enter. This implies the destroyer possesses agency, intention, and a task requiring constraint. The destroyer operates literally. Later interpretations tried to soften the text. The destroyer appears as just the plague, or death itself, or a poetic way of describing divine judgment. But the Hebrew preserves a specific being, an agent, a functionary authorized to kill. The blood on the doorposts provides a marker, a do not enter sign for an entity that kills indiscriminately unless explicitly told to stop. The destroyer appears elsewhere in Scripture. In 2 Samuel 24, after David orders a census, a plague breaks out. The text says, "The angel of the Lord is stretching out his hand to destroy Jerusalem when God commands, 'It is enough, now stay your hand.' The angel stays at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, sword drawn, killing, when the order comes to stop. In 1 Chronicles 21, the same event is described, and the angel bears the name, the destroying angel. The same entity, licensed to kill, restrained only by divine command. The destroyer operates as an executioner. He does not rebel. He avoids acting without authorization. He arrives dispatched, tasked, and constrained. But his nature brings annihilation. His function brings death. The theological problem remains unavoidable. If the destroyer acts on God's orders, then the deaths occur under divine authorization. The violence remains part of the system. Samael accuses, tempts, and kills. The destroyer simply kills. Both function as divine intermediaries. Both stay terrifying because the system requires it. Islamic tradition identifies 4 archangels who stand before Allah: Jibril, Gabriel, Mikael, Michael, Azrael, the angel of death, and Israfil. Israfil's function remains singular. He will blow the trumpet, the sur, to signal the end of the world. The Hadith literature describes him as standing at the edge of the heavens, trumpet already at his lips, waiting for the command. He has been waiting since creation, one breath away from annihilation, suspended for millennia. His size remains incomprehensible. His feet are beneath the lowest earth. His head reaches the highest heaven. The distance avoids specification in miles or cubits. It is described as the distance a bird would fly in 70,000 years. This follows Metatron-scale cosmology, angels whose physical dimensions map onto the structure of creation itself. Israfil spans the world, exceeding the scale of any being within it. The trumpet will sound twice, The first blast will destroy. All living things, humans, jinn, and angels, except those Allah wills to preserve, will die instantly. The earth will be flattened. The mountains will crumble. The seas will boil. The stars will fall. After a period, some traditions say 40 years, the second blast will resurrect. The dead will rise. The judgment will begin. Israfil's role remains mechanical. He avoids judging or executing. He signals instead. The trumpet serves as the alarm clock of the apocalypse. Everything after is procedure. The imagery parallels Jewish and Christian eschatology, the shofar, or the angelic trumpet in Revelation. But Islamic tradition gives the trumpet a specific bearer, a named angel whose only task is to wait and, at the appointed moment, blow. Munkar and Nakir appear immediately after burial. Islamic tradition describes them as the angels of the grave interrogation, Kaaba. When a body is placed in the earth and the mourners leave, these two descend. They appear with specific, terrifying features: black faces, blue eyes, voices like thunder, and breath like fire. Their size remains such that when they sit in the grave, they crush the earth beneath them. They ask 3 questions. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is your prophet? The expected answers: Allah, Islam, Muhammad. If the deceased answers correctly, the grave expands, becomes illuminated, and the soul rests in peace. If the deceased fails, either by answering incorrectly or being unable to answer, the grave contracts, crushing the body, and the soul endures torment until the resurrection. The texts describe these events with literal precision. Munkar and Nakir function as literal beings performing a literal interrogation. The crushing of the grave is physical. The expansion remains physical. The interrogation is forensic. The questions are simple, but the circumstances stay complex. The soul, freshly separated from the body and disoriented, facing 2 monstrous beings in a dark, confined space, must answer correctly. There is no appeal. There is no retrial. While Eastern traditions retained this terrifying scale, the West began a quiet visual revolution in the catacombs. The earliest Christian depictions of angels possess no wings. In the Roman catacombs, underground burial chambers from the 2nd to 4th centuries, angels appear as young men in simple tunics. They carry staffs. They gesture. They stand beside biblical scenes: the 3 visitors to Abraham, the Annunciation to Mary, and the women at the tomb. No visual distinction exists between them and humans, except for the context. The viewer must infer angelhood from the narrative, rather than from the appearance. This stays consistent across early Christian art. Angels appear as messengers who appear as men, whether visiting Abraham or standing at the tomb of Jesus. Early artists painted what the Bible said. The lack of wings was theologically intentional. Wings were associated with pagan gods like Nike, Eros, and Hermes. These deities possessed wings to signify speed, transcendence, and divine power. Early Christians, operating within a Roman visual culture saturated with winged gods, deliberately avoided giving Christian angels wings to prevent confusion. Angels represented servants rather than gods. Making them look like Nike would risk idolatry. For the first 300 years of Christian art, angels remained wingless. By the 5th century, angels had wings. The shift coincides with Christianity's transformation from persecuted sect to imperial religion. After Constantine's conversion and the Edict of Milan, Christian art moved from catacombs to basilicas, from private to public, and from hidden to monumental. In this new context, angels needed to be immediately recognizable and visually distinct. Wingless young men proved too subtle. The solution: borrow the wings. Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, had been depicted with large feathered wings for over 1,000 years. In Greco-Roman art, Nike appears on coins, friezes, and statues, always winged and always in motion, representing triumph, speed, and divine favor. When Rome adopted her, she became Victoria, the personification of military and political success. Christian artists appropriated the iconography wholesale. Angels began appearing with Nike-style wings, large, feathered, and extending from the shoulder blades. The visual grammar had already been established. Wings signify a divine being, transcendent and faster than humans. The Roman audience understood the code instantly. This represented visual conquest rather than subtle borrowing. Nike's wings were stripped of their pagan meaning and reassigned to Christian messengers. The goddess of victory became the template for the servants of God. The iconography was rebaptized. Early examples appear in mosaics at Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome and the Mausoleum of Galla Placidia in Ravenna. Angels in these works possess large, symmetrical wings, clearly modeled on classical victory figures. The theological concern that wings might confuse angels with gods was resolved by Christianization itself. Once Christianity reached dominance, Nike ceased to be a goddess. She became a relic and an aesthetic resource. Her wings could be safely appropriated because she no longer threatened Christian monotheism. The danger of idolatry had passed. Angels earned their wings through empire rather than theology. When Christianity conquered Rome, it inherited Rome's visual language, and Nike's wings became standard angelic anatomy. The 10th to 12th century Beatus manuscripts show angels at their least comforting. Beatus of Liébana was an 8th century Spanish monk who wrote a commentary on the Book of Revelation. His text was copied and illuminated for centuries, producing some of the most vivid apocalyptic art in the medieval period. The angels in these manuscripts function as stern, hierarchical executors of divine wrath. They pour out bowls of plague, blow trumpets that trigger cosmic disasters, wield sickles to harvest souls, and cast the damned into lakes of fire. Visually, they represent intermediate beings. They possess Nike wings, large, feathered, and symmetrical. But their faces function as impassive and judgmental. Their postures stay rigid and formal. They avoid kneeling in worship, standing instead as enforcers and administrators of the end. The color palette reinforces the tone: deep reds, golds, and blacks. The angels find themselves surrounded by flames, falling stars, and beasts rising from the sea. They function as participants in destruction. The medieval period represents the final era in Western Christian art, where angels remain consistently terrifying. The Beatus tradition preserves the older theology, angels as functionaries of divine will, indifferent to human suffering, executing commands without mercy. The text of Revelation describes this role explicitly, and the illuminators painted what the text said. But by the 13th century, this visual language was fading. The next phase, Giotto, Duccio, and the early Renaissance, would introduce something new: emotion. These figures represent the final stand of the inhuman angel. 1305. Giotto paints the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua. In the scene of the Lamentation of Christ, angels hover above the dead body. Their wings remain, standard post-Nike iconography, but their faces introduce something new. They are crying. Some cover their faces with their hands. Some tear at their hair. Others look upward, mouths open in anguish. These avoid the impassive executor role, appearing instead as bereaved witnesses, emotionally invested in the human drama below. This was revolutionary. Prior to Giotto, angels in Western art appeared as symbolic figures, static, formulaic, and emotionally neutral. They gestured, pointed, and held scrolls, but they avoided expressing emotion. Giotto made them human. He avoided merely giving them human bodies or clothes. They already possessed those. He granted them human interiority, the capacity for sorrow, fear, joy, and concern. The theological implications stay significant. If angels grieve, they care. If they care, they function as persons, with preferences, attachments, and emotional responses. They transition from mechanical extensions of divine will to beings with agency, watching, feeling, and responding. This makes them relatable. A grieving angel represents someone you can identify with, whereas an impassive executor avoids that connection. Giotto's innovation spread. By the 14th century, angels across European art were smiling, weeping, singing with visible joy, and recoiling in fear. The emotional range expanded exponentially. The transformation was one of emotional resonance. A church serving a population suffering from plague, war, and famine needed angels who could mourn. Stern enforcers were theologically correct, but emotionally distant. Angels who wept with you and mirrored your grief. Those were the figures that could navigate a world in crisis. The domestication was intentional. The terror was sanded down. The edges became softened, and the result appeared as the guardian angel, both protective and emotionally present. Giotto avoided inventing the guardian angel theology, but he painted the face it needed. The Latin word cherub and the Italian word puto both describe small, winged figures. This linguistic overlap created a visual catastrophe. Putti represent a Renaissance revival of classical Cupid imagery, chubby infants with tiny wings used as decorative motifs in secular art. They appeared in allegorical paintings and architectural ornament, having nothing to do with theology. They served as aesthetic filler. Donatello used putti extensively in his reliefs, singing, dancing, and playing instruments. They appeared charming, playful, and harmless. But the terminology blurred. By the 16th century, the Italian puto had effectively replaced the biblical cherub in religious art. Raphael's Sistine Madonna from 1512 sealed the confusion. At the bottom of the painting, two putti lean on a ledge, gazing upward. They are chubby. In many reproductions, wings are added later. They function as decoration. These became the most reproduced angels in Western art. Postcards, posters, and greeting cards. Millions of images of Raphael's putti, labeled cherubs. The biblical cherubim, monstrous throne guards who barred the way to Eden, were replaced in popular imagination by babies with bows. The result represents a complete inversion. The cherub in Genesis 3:24 wields a flaming sword and prevents access to eternal life. The puto on a Valentine's card shoots arrows that make people fall in love. These represent opposite functions, theologies, and aesthetics, but both bear the name cherub. The contamination was so thorough that by the 18th century, the word cherub primarily meant cute baby angel rather than four-faced guardian of the throne. The biblical meaning faced eclipse. Donatello and Raphael avoided intending this outcome. They were using classical motifs for decoration, but the visual language they popularized overwrote 1,000 years of angelology. The terrifying cherub was domesticated into a greeting card. The 19th century perfected the guardian angel as a visual genre. Paintings showed children crossing bridges, escorted by glowing, gentle angels. Angels watched over cribs and guided travelers. The imagery remained ubiquitous, mass-produced prints and wall hangings in every Christian home. The angels in these images appeared soft, with kind faces and white symmetrical wings. They wore flowing pastel robes, and they avoided carrying swords or pouring out bowls of plague. They focused on protection, guidance, and comfort. This represented domestic safety, made visual. The 19th century remained brutal, filled with high child mortality and industrial accidents. Death arrived frequently, often in the nursery. The terror of the seraphim, or the judgment of the ophanim, offered no refuge for a grieving mother. What people needed was a sentinel for the home, someone personally assigned to the smallest and most vulnerable. The guardian angel filled the cradle rather than the throne room. The visual softening remained intentional. Artists painted angels as non-threatening, young, beautiful, and serene. They avoided anything that could evoke fear. No stern faces, no rigid postures, and no weapons. The goal involved emotional accessibility. An angel that looks like a kind older sibling stays easier to pray to than a wheel covered in eyes. This required a departure from the biblical record. The texts describe terror, while the images show tenderness. The disconnect remained total, yet the pastoral function was achieved. By 1900, the default angel in Western imagination appeared as a gentle, winged guardian, personally assigned and always watching. The malach, the seraphim, and the cherubim all saw themselves subsumed into a single, soft archetype. In the 2000s to 2020s, a meme emerged: biblically accurate angels. Artists began drawing ophanim, wheels within wheels, covered in eyes. Seraphim, six-winged and burning. Cherubim, four-faced and monstrous. The aesthetic remained deliberately unsettling, focusing on cosmic horror and geometric impossibility. The meme's joke remained simple. This is what the Bible actually says angels look like, not the cute ones, the terrifying ones. The resonance was immediate. In an age of digitally rendered cosmic horror, the biblical descriptions fit perfectly. Ezekiel's vision reads like a Junji Ito manga. Isaiah's seraphim sound like Evangelion angels. The meme reclaimed the sublime, the sense of overwhelming, incomprehensible power that induces both terror and awe. The cute guardian angel avoids the sublime, offering comfort and predictability instead. The ophanim offers something else: alienness, vastness, and the sensation of encountering something beyond human categories. This becomes aesthetic rebellion. The artists creating biblically accurate angel art function as individuals rejecting visual blandness. The soft, pastel angel has reached exhaustion. It avoids provoking feeling and remains as wallpaper. The wheel covered in eyes provokes feeling. It forces a response. It reminds the viewer that the divine avoids being safe or comfortable and remains irreducible to human-scale emotions.